Hello again, students. Mr. L here. Welcome to Drawing in Greenfoot Part 3. In this lesson, we're going to be organizing and condensing our code using something called methods. We've seen these methods before, but we're going to try and get a deeper understanding of them today and begin to actually start creating our own. Let's dive back into some of the code that we have. On the left here, I have the project that I shared with you that I created, my art that I made using the coding in Greenfoot. Now, my code is nicely organized. It has lots of comments. It's categorized into its different shapes and sections, so it's relatively easy to look through and figure out where all the information is at different spots. But there's a problem with this code. And the problem is there's a lot of it in one space. Notice this white background color tells me all the information for my constructor from my canvas. Now, this is fine for a beginner, but we want to aim to be as sophisticated in our coding as possible. And what you find is if you code longer pieces of code and maybe extend past, right down here, we have line number 134. But once we're getting to hundreds and thousands of lines of code, further on in your careers, of course, you're going to find that putting all of your code in one section becomes quite a headache to deal with. What we want to do is try and compartmentalize our work into logical chunks. Sometimes that'll actually save us a ton of coding. Other times it won't necessarily save us a lot of word count, but it will save us in terms of being way more organized and categorized in what we call an object-oriented styling. Using these methods here today will only get us part of the way there, but it's an important first step. So let's dive in. On the right here, I have an empty program. What I have done, and I've loaded in place the, my UI is messing up here a little bit, the picture class that we created for our project last time, and the my world class with just the basic bare bones here that allows the image to show up in our world. So all the setup here to create the constructors for the image so that as I'm adding in information, we can see it produced live there in the background. What I'm going to try and do is create something called a method to do something. And we're going to talk about what this is going to look like here. So I'm going to start somewhere right at the top of my code. Over here, the first thing that I did in my initial program was I created this hello world text in the background. And I did it by telling Java to set the color of my image to blue, to choose a font with all the parameters that I sent to it, then to set the font to this font, and then in my image to actually draw this text out for me to see visually. I want to try and have most, if not all of this functionality happen somewhere else in my program. And so what I'm going to be doing is creating a method to be able to handle this so that there's a lot less code here and more of it's organized somewhere else. The first thing I want us to be really clear about is that although I made a comment about a method right here, our methods are going to be created separately from the constructor that we've been working in. So I don't want to be creating it in the white space here. I'm going to erase this and jump down into where I can actually create a new block of coding information. So I'm outside of my constructor, and now I'm creating a new access point, something I can call on to do some work for me. This is going to be about font. And so I'm going to think about calling this something a little bit different. So as I go through this, I'm going to talk you step by step through. And as we go through a little bit further, I might start repeating these individual components. But here we're going to begin at the start here. I first begin creating a method by stating public. Now, in the future, we're going to also be using this term private, which has a lot of uses in terms of disabling people from accessing information that shouldn't in your code. But for now, we're going to keep everything public. So we always begin our methods by stating public for now. Second, we have to include this word void. Now, void means empty. And in this context, it's telling the program that I don't need this method to tell me anything in return. It's kind of like when you rush off to a friend that you're excited to talk to about something and say, don't say anything, I just have to share blah, 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 this person did this, or this event happened, okay, see you later, and they run off. They did not need you to respond, they just had to tell you something. And right now our methods are going to be simple. They want us to tell them something, but we don't need them to tell us anything back, void. In the future, if we wanted it to tell us something back, then I could tell it, what do I want to hear in return? Do I want to have a number told to me in return? Do I want some words told to me in return? Do I want true or false told to me in return? There's plenty of things we can fill in this gap. But for now, we're going to keep it simple. We don't need it to tell us anything, so we're just going to put in void. Now, the third and final thing in this first line I have to add is the name of this method. And here's where you can be creative, but also concise. Try to make it describe what it is that you're doing. And what I want this method to do is to initialize my font. Now, remember that when we're creating things like methods, we talked a bit about this in the past, we always want to start with a lowercase letter. Starting with an uppercase letter is how we create a class, and we want to be able to differentiate them somehow. So a method, lowercase letter. If there's ever another word, we don't want to put a space in here, otherwise it breaks up the name. We just start it with a capital letter. We call this, I'm going to type it out here if my program loads, camel case. Think of a camel with the hump in the middle of its body, or maybe 2 or 3 humps. Maybe you've seen some super camel with 8 humps. That'd be pretty cool. Think of it needs to look like a camel, small at the start, and then the humps in the middle for each individual word that we create. Actually, I'll leave this here as my method, just to remind ourselves. All right, so we've named it. Public void. This will be consistent for all your methods, and then a name that I've given it. And then I need to remember that I'm sending information to it, but there's something a little bit different going on here. Before I go too far, I'm going to create the braces, the curly braces that contain the information for this method, because it's just good form to have there in place so that I've organized everything in a great way, and then my information that goes in there is going to be indented in. When we call a method inside of our constructor or inside of something that's going on, I put the information that I'm sending to it inside of these braces. However, when I'm creating the method's instructions, what goes in here is not what I'm sending, but what I'm receiving. The information I'm receiving. So we're going to think of this through in a minute, what we want it to receive. But first, I want to think about what we want going on inside this code itself. Now, I would like the functionality that goes on with my font to happen in this method instead. So to keep things simple, I want the font to be set to blue. I want the font to be set to Garmin, and I want the image to be set to my font. So here is what I am going to do. I'm going to copy and paste this information over here, and let me just think for a sec how I want to do this. We're going to leave this kind of separate out to the side for a sec here. Inside the information that I receive, I want to be able to have this as a customized method in a certain sense, meaning that I want to be able to send it the message and maybe where the message appears customized. Here's what I'm going to tell it. I want this method, to receive text. I'm going to call the text message. So what I've done here, I've said expect to get some text, and then call that text you get message. Give it the name message. And then I also want to receive the information where I want this message to appear on the screen. And so remember from before, we set the X and Y values. So I'm going to say expect to get some information about the X value, expect to get some information about the Y value. Whenever this method is used, it will expect all 3 of these pieces of information in that order. And now that it receives them, it can actually use them to do something. So here's where I come back to drawing my string, and here's where the customization starts to kick in, and this gets really powerful. I'm going to start to put this in the same way. I'm going to assign my image some information by calling on the drawString method that's already created for us. Here we're creating our own custom method. This has already been created for us by the Greenfoot creators. And instead of hello world inside of this, I want it to send it my message. And instead of the numbers 400 and 200, I want the customized numbers that I send to this method. And then I close off that functionality. What this method is going to do is going to set color, font, text, and position of a custom string or a custom message that we want to be able to set. So because I added some extra functionality to this, I might change this to be something like create message to be printed to the screen. Now you'll see in the example project I share with you, I do things a little bit differently than in here, but I want to show you lots of different ways of thinking this through. So here's where this gets awesome. In my code, I want to create the hello world message. That's what I want to have happen. So here's what I'm going to do. I've now created a method right here in my world class. My world knows about this because we're already in it. So I can just simply tell it to create a message for me, and then I'm going to send it the information that I want. I'm going to send it hello world as my string, and then I'm going to send it in X and Y position. And back over here in my project, it was 400 and 200. So I'm going to send that information to it. So now what it's done is it sent this information to my method, and then my method takes that information and does all of its functionality using my information to do something for me. And bam, it appears. The awesome thing about this is that let's say now I wanted to add some more text. So I'm going to just toss in here testing 1, 2, 3. And let's send this just somewhere different on the page. Let's go to 200, 100, just a random spot. Just by doing that, bam, a message appears. I have to do a lot less work to create new versions of this functionality because my method already does it for me. This is going to save me a lot of code in the long run if I want to repeat the same types of things in my program. Let's try a different shape this time around. Why don't we try to work with our sun? All right, so down here, what I want to do is public void, like before, public void. I don't need to send me any information back. I just want it to do something. I want it to create the sun. Okay, well, think of what we have to add in here in a minute here. But for now, the sun, okay, we definitely want to borrow the set color to yellow. Oops, because the sun is going to be yellow for sure. Make sure it's tabbed in for that contained information here. And I want to follow this information, the method fill oval. And let's remember what it wants. It wants the X and the Y value, and then it wants the width and the height of our sun. You could design this in a couple ways. You could include inside of it some preset numbers and only send it a couple, or you could send it all 4. Just to use something different, I'm going to customize it a little bit more. I want to say that the sun is always the same size. I can just create many of them or just choose where I want it in a more customized way. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say inside my method, I'm going to define a new number called width. Okay, this is the width of the sun that's allowed. I'm now defining a variable. Width is a variable that is a number, and its value is 100. I'm going to create the height of the sun also to be 100. So now, when I fill my oval, I have those values as already kind of being preset in place, stored in a variable. But I still want sent to my sun the X value and the Y value where the sun is going to appear. So when I fill my oval, it needs 4 pieces of information. It needs the X value where it's created, the Y value where it's created, and then the width that it's going to stretch to, and the height that it's going to stretch to. And this is going to create a yellow oval from the point where I set it. Again, you could not use this and send it 2 more pieces of information if you wanted. So create sun. I'm going to create the sun in my program. So my method again, create sun. And I want to send it 2 pieces of information. Back in my original project here, it was 500 and 0. And with me just typing in the sent information into my method, bam, the sun appears at the top. Or maybe I want to do things a bit differently. Maybe I changed my mind. I want to redesign it into the other corner. I can just change that simple send number, and it's going to create it for me automatically. Beautiful. Let's leave it over there for now because that's just really nice. All right. I think you might be getting the idea. Let's do 2 more together so you can see. Let's do create window, because that's something that involves kind of a cool thing that we can think about in terms of how the math works for all this. So back in our program, we remember that to create the windows, we first had to fill in the white and then outline it in black and then put in the black crossing sections. All of that had to happen in the creation of our windows. So, for example, the left window right here has all these steps to it. We're going to see if we can make a general set of rules for creating a window that allows us to be much more customized in its design. So, if I recall, the way that my window was made, when I filled the rect, the first two numbers were the x and y values, and then this is this width stretch, and this is the height stretch. In my program, I'm going to leave the windows with the same, well, actually, why don't we make them more customized? That would be kind of cool. So I'm going to toss in my inputs for now. My first one is going to be the top left x value of where the window is going to start to be created. Then my top left y value, where it's going to be created. And then I want my width, and I want my height. Oop. Okay, that's all the information that I want sent to it when I use the method up in my constructor up here. So now I need to define some of the logic of this. The first thing I have to do is set my color to white. I'm just going to copy and paste that over to save a second typing here. And now with white, I want to fill this rectangle. Now, which rectangle is it in this case? Well, what we're working with here, because we have information sent to us, it's going to be the top left x for the top corner, the top left, make sure I spell it right, I was going to crash, y, and the width and the height. I can just use that information directly to fill the initial rectangle. Let's see what happens here. Now, it's white and I have a white background, so we're going to have to wait a sec to see our outline. So let's take our color black, and now we're going to create the outline of this with the same information by drawing the black outline like we've done previously. And, oh, I realized my problem. I forgot. I'm not seeing it because I have not yet called create window anywhere in my program. I want to see this developing as I create it. So let's do that now. Let's create a window. And to do that, let's remind myself, create window with 4 inputs, x, y, width, height. So I'm going to create a window, and I'm going to send to it, let's just use the same information from over here, 10, 310, 40, 40. And notice that it does that functionality all together for us. It's hard to see that it's back. Just to double check that it's working, why don't we just do this really quick? Blue, just to see if it works, and it does. So I'm just going to change this back to white. Cool. So now I have this outline of the window. I still need to put the cross bars on this window itself. Here's where we have to think a tiny bit mathematically. Black is the color that I want. I'm going to leave it as black, but I need to now create a line. So I'm going to draw a line. And let me think about the method. You can always look back at the Java docs if you forget how these methods work, but for now I'm just going to talk about them, and you can feel free to pause it and take a peek if you're curious. So the very first line is going to be at the top left of where I create this window, halfway towards the other side. So the width, it's half of the width. So here's how I define the first part of this line. Top left x plus width divided by 2. Java will do this math for me, meaning it's going to place that first point, maybe I'll jump over into this one, half at the top left x, but halfway towards the width. So that's where I'm starting here. Now I haven't defined my y value yet. What's my y value going to be? Well, it's going to be the top left y, because the y value at the corner is the same y value as here, because it hasn't gone down or up at all. So I can just use that same y value. And now I need this point down here. Note that it's still the halfway between the width, but now it's one whole height further down. So here's how I'm going to type this in. Top left x plus width divided by 2 for the x value. And now top left y's value plus the height. See what that looks like. Bam, right down the middle here. If this piece of code doesn't make sense to you right now, feel free to pause the video and read it over. For now, I'm going to add the second part in just to show you here. My image, draw a line, top left X, top left Y, plus height divided by 2. I've now defined it as being top left X plus the top left Y plus half of the height. So I'm starting at the middle here and I want to go across to the far side. To get to the far side, it's top left X plus width, because I'm moving the whole width to the right, and the top left Y plus height divided by 2 to stay on that same plane. There we go. A window put it in that place right there. This is all the code that I need to create a window like in our original project. And now what I can do is instead say create windows. And if I can jump back to my code over here, I notice that my right window began at these coordinates. So I'm just going to create a new window at 150, 310, 40, 40. Oop, don't forget my comma. With this simple command, I should be able to populate another window. I can add as many windows to my project with one line inputting the information that it expects in the input here. Let's do one more, the most complicated one, a polygon. Now, these ones can get a little bit funny because there's some more customization that goes into them, but we're going to try our best to create a general rule for this so that you can actually populate your project with as many of them as you want very easily. So let's just once again create public void, and we're going to say create polygon. Maybe you have a more specific thing you want to name this. Maybe in your project you have a house, or maybe you want to say a cat, or whatever it is that you put in. Maybe I don't want to know. Create polygon. I'm just going to put in my brackets properly here. Make sure my tab's over there correctly. And let's think about the way that in this project on the side, over here, we created the house itself. We had to use an array with a bunch of different values in it to tell it the value of the X and the Y coordinates. Remember, we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. First, the list of the X's, and then the list of the Y's to create this 5-sided figure. Let's see if we can replicate that using a method so we can make as many houses as we want to really quite easily. I'm going to show you the logic, and feel free to pause if I'm going a little bit too fast. I'm going to start by telling this method to accept the bottom left X coordinate and the bottom left Y coordinate. That's the information I want sent to it, and that's it. Everything else is going to be constructed in the logic down below. I'm also going to create a local variable, a number called change equals 100. And what this is going to be responsible for is the distance between each of these points. In my picture, it's mostly really even in terms of the distances between things. In yours, it might not be, and I'll show you briefly how we can account for that. It's not too difficult. So, because I'm working with an array, I need to define my array of X values. I'm not going to fill in any values just yet. I'm just going to set this numbering up, or the labeling up, and the Y values. And I need the number of points that I have. And in this case, we're going to stick with 5. It'll be customized for whatever else that you do. And instead of putting in each of the specific numbers, now I could do that. I could put in 0, 50, 100, and so on. The problem with that is that every single time I created a polygon, it would make the same shape in the same place. Not very customized. I want it to be able to adapt to different locations so that it's as customizable as possible. So, the very bottom of my polygon is going to be wherever my bottom left X is. That's going to be the first X value, and the first Y value is going to be at the bottom Y position. Let's think about the X for now, though. The first X in my picture is at the bottom X position. The second X is at the same X position because it hasn't moved in at all, but I still have to tell my array that that's the position. Make sure that everything's capitalized properly. Almost messed out there. Now, my third X position over here is some distance inwards, and I'm just going to say that it's the change amount of distance. We can always tweak this later if it doesn't look right. bottom left x plus change. That's how far in the x value is. The next x value is 2 changes in, plus 2 times change. Let me just stretch this out a little bit here so we can see it going across. And then our final x value is once again at that same 2 times change. That describes all our x positions. Now let's generally describe all our y's. Our first y is at the bottom left y. The next y, we're going to say that it is 100 units upwards. Remember, going up is minus. So it's going to be bottom left y minus change. The next one over, minus 2 changes. Minus 2 times change. Then the next one over is only minus 1 change. And finally, it's at the same y value that we started with at the bottom left of y. And our number of points is 5. Cool. So that should be all the information that we need to create a house anywhere we want at any starting point that we send to it. Let's just wrap up putting in the information for this method so that we can wrap this video up. Now, the first thing that I remember having to do is to fill in the color of it. So here I'm going to call, in our project previously, we had to find a new color. Just to remind ourselves of how we do this here, we access the constructor of a new color, 228, 228, 2228 for our nice gray color. And I'm going to set the color to this new color that I've created. And now I'm going to fill a polygon. And in here, I have to tell it the 2 arrays and then the number of points. Easy. I tell it the x values, the y values, and the number of points. Those are all defined as previously named pieces of information. And I need to put an S on this to make it work. And light gray. Typing counts big time in Java. Now, my image, set color. I want the outline now, black. And my image, draw, polygon, the same information. Just this time, I'm just doing the outline by just drawing around it. So what we hopefully will see here is if I create a polygon up in here, let's keep the spacing the same. I call my method, and I want to start it at the bottom of my screen here. That was at 0 for x, and what is that, 400 for y? Let's just see if I did it right here. It creates the outline of that house. One thing I notice, the windows need to be created after the polygon, otherwise it will put the polygon over top because of the layering that goes on here. So let's just create the polygon first, do this again. There's our house, there's our windows, and now what we can do is, let's say I want to move that house over. I don't like it here. I'm just going to change the x value. Bam, the house is moved over. Or maybe I want to make a whole bunch of these. I can just go create a few polygons. So this guy has some extra next door neighbors, 200, 400. Now, that's a bit of a strange result. Anyway, you see the point here that we can create multiple, there we go, didn't update right for some reason. Awesome. We can create as many of these as we want now really easily because we defined the rules for it down in our method here. Your task in your projects is to take your code and change as much of it as you possibly can out of the constructor and into methods that you call. The more you have, the better. I should see lots of different methods so that you're able to reproduce shapes and different scenarios really easily and succinctly. If you want one extra challenge to work with, I'm going to show you one final thing here. Recall in our earlier projects, when we created a class, let's create an alligator here. Spelled it. An alligator with that picture. I can just hold shift and place this alligator in my world wherever I want in a custom way. There should be a way that I can maybe make a house or a window or a sun or a hello world text and be able to do it in a similar way where I click it over here and able to place it in my world. This is not a required part of this project, but if you want the extra challenge and want to prove and show how well you're understanding what we're doing in Java right now, creating a customized class to do the functionality for you would be really cool to see. Kind of curious to see if you can pull it off. But no worries if you can't. For now, let me know if you need help in class. Hope that made sense. Good luck creating your own custom methods.